The wind was making a sound I'd never heard before, a kind of low moan through the vent above the nurses' station, and I stood there with a stack of discharge folders in my hands, listening to it, when the lights flickered once, twice, and settled back into their usual buzzing hum. "They're not going to close Route 6, I said, mostly to convince myself. "They never close Route 6. They closed it 40 minutes ago." Dr. Owen Marsh didn't look up from the whiteboard he was updating, marker squeaking against the surface. "I heard it on the scanner. You're staying. I have a shift tomorrow at 7. You have a shift in 5 hours wherever you're sleeping tonight, Ramirez, so it might as well be a cot in the on-call room instead of a ditch on Route 6. I hated that he was right. I hated it more that he said it in that flat, sure-of-himself voice he used on everyone, like he'd already made the decision for me and was just waiting for me to catch up. We'd worked opposite each other for 8 months at Alder Regional, a hospital small enough that everybody knew everybody's coffee order and nobody's business stayed private for long, and in that time, Owen Marsh and I had built something that wasn't quite a friendship and wasn't quite a rivalry either. We argued about triage priorities. We argued about whether the break room radio should stay on the classic rock station. We argued, once, memorably, about whether it was acceptable to eat cold pizza for breakfast, an argument I'd lost only because he'd eaten the last slice while making his point. By 9, the parking lot was gone, not covered, gone, swallowed into one flat white sheet that blurred into the sky so completely you couldn't tell where the ground stopped and the storm began. By 10, the 2 nursing assistants on evening shift had made it out just before the road sealed shut behind them, waving frantic goodbyes through windows already crusting with ice. By 11, it was just me, Owen, and Deb from the front desk, who took one look at the whiteboard, muttered something about her cat, and disappeared into the break room to call her neighbor for the 4th time. Which left me alone with him for the stretch between patients, standing at the window in the empty waiting room, watching snow pile against the glass in a way that felt almost personal, like it had a grudge against us specifically. "You've got that look," Owen said, appearing beside me with 2 coffees, handing me one without asking if I wanted it, which annoyed me less than it should have. "What look?" "The one where you're doing math in your head, figuring out if you can walk it." "I wasn't." "You absolutely were." He took a sip, made a face at the coffee, drank it anyway. "It's 4 miles, Ramirez, in a blizzard at night. You'd make the news, not the good kind." I laughed before I meant to, and something about the sound surprised us both, like neither of us had expected me to find him funny after 8 months of finding him mostly exasperating. He glanced at me sideways, a small, startled smile tugging at his mouth, and for a second, the whole hallway felt smaller, warmer, like the storm outside had pulled all the space in the building closer together just to make room for whatever this was. We got one call around midnight, a man 3 streets over with chest pain who couldn't get an ambulance through the drifts, and Owen went out into it himself on foot, dragging the emergency sled behind him like something out of a story people would tell for years. I stood at the doors watching his flashlight shrink into the white until it was just a smear of light, and I realized, with an unease I didn't examine too closely, that I was holding my breath the whole time he was gone. When he came back 40 minutes later, soaked through, half frozen, practically carrying the patient between the sled and his own strength, I didn't say anything about how scared I'd been. I just handed him warm blankets and didn't let go of his arm for a beat longer than the moment required. "You could have waited for the 2nd unit," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. There wasn't a 2nd unit. There wasn't anything. It was me or nothing. He was shivering, teeth chattering around the words, but he was looking at me like my worry meant something to him, like it had landed somewhere he hadn't expected. "Don't do that again." "Careful, Ramirez. Almost sounds like you care." "Don't let it go to your head." But it already had, a little, and so had mine, and around 2 in the morning, with the patient stabilized and resting and Deb finally asleep in the break room, Owen and I ended up sitting on the floor of the supply closet, backs against opposite shelves, sharing a bag of pretzels someone had left behind at the holiday party, because it turned out that was the only place in the building where the wind didn't scream through the walls. "Can I tell you something stupid?" he said, staring at the pretzel bag like it held answers. Depends how stupid. I requested this hospital on purpose. Alder Bend. I had 2 other offers. Better pay. Bigger city. He paused. I picked here because of you. Because I'd met you once at a conference, and I couldn't stop thinking about the way you argued with the guy on the panel about wait time metrics. I stared at him. Outside, the wind screamed against the building like it wanted in. You've never once mentioned that in 8 months. What was I supposed to say? Hi, I moved across 3 states because you were right about a spreadsheet. That's the least romantic reason a person has ever given for anything. I'm aware. He looked at me, and for once there was nothing sharp or argumentative in it, just something quiet and a little afraid, the way people look when they've handed you something breakable and are waiting to see if you'll drop it. So, was I an idiot? I thought about the 8 months of bickering, the classic rock, the cold pizza, the way I'd held my breath watching his flashlight vanish into the snow. I thought about how easy it would have been to never find out if the storm hadn't shut every door in the world except this one. Ask me again when the roads are clear, I said. See if I still mean it the same way when I'm not trapped. He smiled like that was answer enough for tonight, and we sat there until the sky outside turned that pale, exhausted grey that means morning is coming whether the snow agrees or not. And I kept thinking, even after the ploughs finally broke through around 7, that some people you have to get snowed in with before you can see them clearly at all, and I wondered how many of us have a version of that night somewhere, a storm that forced 2 stubborn people into the same small room until the truth had nowhere left to hide.